Chapter 3 Sudden Flight. When Chief McGinnis finished his phone call, he looked at Nancy and grinned. "Young lady," he said, "are you getting mixed up with underworld characters?" The girl smiled back. "Not if I can help it," she replied. "But if there's one for me to catch, you know I'll certainly go after him." "Well, watch your step," the officer advised. "The Caputis are suspected of having committed a number of crimes, but nothing could ever be proved against them." "I don't want to see that Rosina Caputi again," Bess declared. "She has a horrible expression on her face, and her eyes bored right through me in Mr. Moto's shop." Nancy remarked, "You said Caputi is a jewel thief. Does he specialize in pearls?" "Yes, although he'll take along anything that's handy," the chief replied. "Why do you ask?" "Because that's what Mr. Moto works with primarily," Nancy replied. "I'd like to find out more about pearls." "You should call on Professor Joji Misei," Chief McGinnis told her. "He is Japanese and has lived in this country a long time teaching Japanese art. He's a most interesting person, and I'm sure he can give you lots of information about pearls and the customs of his country. Tell the professor I suggested you get in touch with him." The girls thanked Chief McGinnis and left headquarters. "Let's call on Professor Misei this afternoon," Nancy suggested as they climbed back into her car. "We can have lunch at my house first." Bess and George agreed. Later, when they were about to leave the Drew home, Nancy's dog Togo, a frisky bull terrier, barked and whined. "He wants to come along," said Nancy. "Listen, old fellow, if I take you, will you behave?" Togo wagged his tail vigorously, which meant that he was promising to be good on the trip. He jumped into the passenger seat in the front, so Bess and George climbed into the rear. When they reached the Misei house, Nancy left Togo in the car and opened the 4 windows part way for air. The girls found Professor Misei at home. He proved to be charming, and his wife a lovely, dainty lady. He considered the police chief a good friend and a very fine officer. Nancy asked the professor about his native country, and he began to describe Japan, its customs, and some of its history. As he was talking, a large, beautiful, tortoise-shell-colored cat wandered into the room, jumped up on the sofa, and settled down to go to sleep. "What a beautiful animal," Nancy remarked. Professor Misei told her that it was a Mikaniko. They are a great rarity, and among Japanese fishermen there's a superstition that these cats can make accurate weather forecasts. Japanese sailors often have one or more aboard their vessels. It is even said that they are a charm against shipwreck. "How interesting," said Bess, who owned a cat, but admitted it was not as beautiful as this one. Then she requested that the professor tell them something about the history of pearls. "They're only found in the waters of Asia, aren't they?" she asked. "Oh, no. Pearl oysters live in many parts of the world," the professor replied. "Did you know that even American Indians prized pearls and wore strands of them?" The girls shook their heads, and their host continued. "Not every tribe did, mostly the ones along the seashore. Indians in Virginia, for instance, liked necklaces, beads, and sometimes even anklets made from pearls." George spoke up. "How did you find out about this?" The professor said that it was reported in old documents by white settlers of the 17th century. "Even in Ohio," he went on, "which is not on the ocean, skeletons with pearls in their mouths were found dating back to the era of mound builders." George raised her eyebrows. "In their mouths?" I suppose the Indians believed that the healing propensities of the pearl would be beneficial for the dead person's journey to the happy hunting grounds. You know that the pearl was used for medicinal purposes when that science was still in its infancy. In India, for instance, people used to insert one or more pearls in the wounds of injured warriors to help them heal. Do pearls last forever? Bess asked. I do not know about forever, but one pearl found in a Japanese storehouse was 1,000 years old. After the dust had been removed, it turned out that the pearl had retained its original luster. How marvelous! Bess exclaimed. Just then Nancy heard Togo barking. She looked out the window in time to see him leap from the car. He ran to the house and whined to be allowed to come in. Nancy went to the front door to chastise her pet, but the dog had other ideas. He scooted past her into the living room, where he heard voices. Suddenly he spied the cat on the sofa. He shot across the room and barked furiously at the animal. The Mikaniko stood up and arched its back. Togo put his paws on the couch and yapped at the cat. Frightened, it jumped onto a table, knocking over a beautiful Japanese vase. Nancy made a dive for her pet and grabbed him by the collar. "You naughty, naughty dog!" she exclaimed, and took him back to the car. This time she closed the windows a little more so he could not get out again. She returned to the house and apologized for Togo's actions. "I'm dreadfully sorry about the vase," she said. "May I have it mended or replace it? I would feel much better about this." Mrs. Mise had taken hold of her cat. She turned to Nancy. "You are not responsible for this mishap. I would not think of permitting you to buy us another one." Although Nancy was very insistent, her host and hostess would not give in. To help the girl over her embarrassment, the professor went on talking about Japan and pearls. He mentioned that for thousands of years, people knew only of natural pearls found in oysters. Then came the industry of pearl culture, he said. Today it is one of the biggest businesses in Japan. You really should visit that group of beautiful islands and see one of the culture farms. "Just how are cultured pearls made?" George asked. "As far as the oyster is concerned, the same way as natural pearls. It happens when a small foreign object gets inside the shell, like a grain of sand, for instance. In the pearl beds, man helps this process by inserting a sphere ranging in diameter from 2 to 10 millimeters. These nuclei come from the shell of freshwater bivalves and are polished prior to their use." "I'll bet the oyster doesn't like that one bit," Bess declared. True. It annoys the oyster so much that it gives off a fluid called nacre. This coats the offending object and hardens. The result is a pearl. "Then cultured pearls are really not imitations," George said. "Oh no. Today that is practically all you can buy because few natural pearls are fished anymore. But in ancient times, divers searched the deep water for the oysters. They risked their health and many times their lives hunting for pearls, which only royalty and aristocrats were allowed to wear." "How mean!" Bess said. "That seems very unfair." Her cousin George could not resist teasing her. "Why, Bess, I always thought you wanted to be a queen." Bess made a face but did not comment. Professor Mise said, "My brother and his wife live just outside Tokyo. If you are ever in Japan, you must look them up. You would be welcome at their home, and my brother, who is retired from government work, would take you to one of the culture farms." George smiled. "Is it a Japanese custom to invite people to your brother's home?" The Mises laughed. "In a way, yes," the professor replied. "But we invite only people we like." "Such a trip would be very exciting," Nancy said. "But right now I can't leave here because I'm working on a case for Mr. Moto, the jeweler." "Oh, I know Mr. Moto well," the professor said. "A very nice man." The girls and the Mises talked for a while longer about pearls in Japan. Then Nancy and her friends stood up to say goodbye. "Please visit us again soon," Mrs. Mise said. "We will be glad to tell you more about our country." The girls promised to do so, then thanked their hosts and left. The following morning, Nancy suggested going to Mr. Moto's shop again. Perhaps he had heard from Mrs. Rossmeyer or had another idea as to who might have stolen her necklace. When the girls walked through the door, they were surprised to see a stranger standing behind the counter. Nancy inquired about Mr. Moto and was told that the jeweler had left very hurriedly for Japan. "My name is Kikichi," the man explained. "I am a friend. Mr. Moto asked me to take care of his shop while he is away. May I help you?" "Did Mr. Moto say why he was leaving?" Nancy asked. "No, he did not." "Does he have any relatives in Japan?" George asked. "Perhaps it was a family emergency?" "I do not know. He did not say." Nancy wondered if by chance the jeweler had received a lead to Mrs. Rossmeyer's stolen necklace and had gone to retrieve it. But why had he not called her? All three girls felt that Mr. Moto's sudden disappearance was quite strange. Was Mr. Kikichi telling the truth, or was he covering up a secret of foul play? To verify his story, the girls began looking around the shop, admiring the various art objects. They called back and forth to Mr. Kikichi, asking questions and receiving answers. Nancy drifted toward the back room, where Mr. Moto had laid down to sleep the previous day. She wanted to look inside for clues. As she came closer, Mr. Kikichi called out, "This way! Don't go back there! Come this way!" Nancy pretended not to hear him and hurried into the room despite his orders. She stopped short in amazement. The place was a shambles! End of chapter 3.